A regular fishing trip turns into a mass shooting of 7 people. A 15-year-old schoolgirl kills her classmate over unrequited love. A lover takes deadly revenge on his ex, and an ordinary man dies after visiting the military enlistment office. Or maybe someone helped him do it. Today we're talking about the most high-profile criminal cases in Zhytomyr region, dear viewers, so make yourselves comfortable.
It's terrible.
The conflict involved veterans, and 7 people died in the confrontation with them. Self-defense or murder?
Novoselytsia in the Zhytomyr region is much like many other Ukrainian villages. Similar houses with gardens, a community center, village council, store, and bus stop. I think hardly anyone would have heard about Novoselytsia if it weren't for one particular event, besides this video of course. A mass shooting that resulted in the deaths of 7 people, and the event took place on the night of May 21st to 22nd in 2022. After that, the village literally froze. After all, firstly, the victims were soldiers and volunteers, and secondly, almost every resident of Novoselytsia knew the shooter well. However, no one could have imagined what he was capable of. Anatoly Zakharenko came to Novoselytsia at the end of the 1990s.
I have been here since 1993. I renounced my Russian citizenship and became a citizen of Ukraine.
So you've basically been in debt since your first year here?
Pretty much, yes. I've been in Ukraine all the time. I haven't left here, except for one time in 2006.
I flew to Novosibirsk to see my mother, who was alive then.
Some say that everything in the family was peaceful, while others remember this family's life a little differently. They say Anatoly's hot temper caused constant problems.
Here's a quote. In general, he was rowdy. He had a hot temper. That's true.
Once, back when we didn't live here yet, it seems he and his wife used to fight. Their son died, but I don't know the details. He didn't live at home here, but lived over there, by the ponds.
The ponds that the local resident is talking about were Zakharenko's passion. In particular, that's where he made his income. He caught fish and invited people to relax there, of course, not for free. Actually, here's what a fellow villager told journalists back in 2020. He has a good wife who works at the village council. They're not divorced, but since he made money with that fish, he spent most of his time there and only came home occasionally. People often visited him for leisure, and we did too when we were young.
He has worked there for years. We used to visit to swim and relax.
To swim and relax. We arrived in May at the same ponds where Zakharenko practically lived, not just worked, along with 8 friends. The guests from Kiev wanted to celebrate the birthday of 44-year-old Roman Kanenko, one of their group. In addition, among the visitors were Volodymyr Kuprianov, Eskender Osmanov, Vitaly Vulchin, Vladislav Mamichenko, Andriy Moskalyets, Vadim Fedyunin, and Alexander Belus. They were former anti-terrorist operation participants, active National Guard members, and volunteers at the time. The youngest was 30, the oldest was 60. They had been to Novoselytsia before. Most had known Zakharenko for years and had visited him on vacation multiple times. For years there had been no hostile relations or basically conflicts between the men. On May 21st, there was also no indication that anything might go differently than usual for everyone. They arrived, greeted each other, went fishing, grilled some meat, had a few drinks, started talking heart to heart as they say, gradually got tired, and the friends began to go to bed. This place allowed them not to go home, but to stay overnight in the cabins near the pond. In the end, just 3 people were left in the gazebo, 2 guests and Zakharenko. What exactly the men were discussing is not known for sure, but one thing is absolutely clear. When most of the group went to bed, gunshots were heard. One after another, bullets flew out of the shotgun and struck the guests, the very same ones who, just a few minutes earlier, had been sitting in the gazebo and relaxing. First, 2 were killed, then the bullets took the lives of 2 more, and then the killer came for the rest. Out of the 4 friends who were still alive and sleeping in the house, only one managed to escape, Vadim Fedyunin. He heard a shot fired behind him. There was no question whether they were trying to shoot him, the answer was obvious. Not wanting to end up like his friends, Fedyunin ran toward the village as fast as he could, looking for help from the people who lived nearby. He knocked on doors and shouted, trying to explain the situation in a few words and convince them to let him in. He didn't find such brave people right away, but eventually luck smiled on the man. Caring people let him in and called the police as well as an ambulance. The law enforcement officers who arrived soon after were truly shocked. Even the experienced cops couldn't recall such a gruesome scene of a mass shooting. Given the undoubtedly high-profile nature of the case, the then head of the local National Police Department, Serhii Krupe, and the deputy head of the National Police of Ukraine, Oleksiy Rudenko, arrived at the scene. The main suspect turned out to be none other than the pawn tenant, Anatoly Zakharenko. The day after the tragic events in the Novosibirsk settlement, the Korolyovsky district court of Zhytomyr was choosing a preventive measure for Zakharenko. He was brought to the hearing under heavy escort and accompanied inside the courthouse by dozens of law enforcement officers. The security measures were also unprecedented. The man was wearing a bulletproof vest and a Kevlar helmet. Zakharenko then addressed the court and stated that his actions were nothing but self-defense. But he refused to share most of the details about that evening and the nature of the conflict between him and the men. Here's a quote: "It was self-defense. If they hadn't shot at me, I wouldn't have opened fire. I wasn't planning to kill anyone. I had never killed anyone before, and I definitely didn't want to this time if they hadn't shot at me. I wasn't under the influence of drugs or alcohol. I was completely sober, but anyone's mind reacts in self-defense. There were 8 of them, and I was alone at night. I wasn't hiding. I called the State Bureau of Investigation and informed authorities. I waited, authorities arrived, I approached, put the shotgun on the hood, and that was it. I could have run away, but I didn't, because I'm an honest man." So, that day the court announced its decision to keep the suspect in custody for 60 days without the possibility of bail. The main assumptions about what happened were voiced by law enforcement quite promptly. Quote, "At first glance, it looks like a domestic conflict that arose because they were drinking vodka and washing it down with beer. You can see for yourself how it ended. 7 dead. These people were friends with each other. They had known each other for more than 10 years. Unfortunately, that's how it turned out." According to the official statement, which was formed based on the investigation's version, 2 vacationers and the pawn's tenant were indeed drinking alcohol together. During this, a conflict broke out between the men. As a result, the suspect first killed the 2 men he was drinking with using a hunting rifle, and then went to the cabin where there were 6 more men and shot 5 of them. One of them, Vadim Fedyunin, managed to escape to the village, from where he informed the police about the incident. At the trial, Fedyunin said he had known Zakharenko for over 15 years. On the day of the murder, the group was fishing and grilling meat on the shore of the pond, and then Zakharenko himself joined them. Fedyunin said everyone was drinking, and as the gathering went on, people gradually went to sleep and everything was fine. Almost asleep, Fedyunin heard gunshots and screams, and after getting out of his sleeping bag, he started waking up the other men. Next is a quote from the man. "I told them that it seemed like Anatoly was shooting, then Kanenko opened the door and asked what happened. He didn't have time to finish his sentence. A shot rang out and he fell dead. The guys woke up and started asking what had happened. The accused came in with a shotgun and pointed the barrels at me. Volkan, another friend, had already gotten up and rushed to the corner where our things were, possibly for a knife, I'm not sure. Then he grabbed the barrels of the accused's shotgun, and I jumped up to help him." According to Fedyunin, Zakharenko pulled the shotgun toward himself, after which a shot was fired, resulting in the death of Vitaly Vulchin. Quote, "I heard how, at point-blank range, Vulcan was shot somewhere in the chest, and I realized that he had also died. I jumped over him, and the accused snatched the barrel from his hands and was dropping cartridges in the hallway as he moved. While running outside, I heard him reload, and when I heard a shot behind me aimed at my back, I managed to sharply dodge to the right. 5 seconds later, there was another shot, and 10 seconds after that, 2 more shots, and after 3 to 5 minutes, I heard about 20 shots. I realized that he had reached Belus's rifle, judging by the sounds. And indeed, at the scene of the bloody shooting, there were plenty of murder weapons." During the incident, law enforcement officers seized 6 firearms that were registered and belonged to the participants of the event. Zakharyenko was not just a fisherman and tenant but also a skilled hunter. He had a 16-gauge shotgun while the deceased owned Remington and Ruger carbines, an Avtomat Kalashnikova Modernizirovanny Skladnoy MF, one Zbroyer Z15 and a PMT pistol. But that's still far from all the details. On May 22nd, a number of media outlets published material with a comment from Anatoly Zakharyenko's brother, Mr. Viktor. A comment stating that the local police officers demanded money and fish from Anatoly in exchange for not interfering with his business activities. On May 21, the State Bureau of Investigation detained the district police chief for bribery. That evening, Viktor said some military acquaintances visited his brother, suspecting him of betrayal. They apparently wanted to resolve some matters more than relax. But there's no need to explain to Zakharenko how to run a business and who to report on. The result of these disputes was supposedly the mass murder. The police spokesperson for Zhytomyr region, Alla Vashchenko, confirmed Anatoly Zakharenko's involvement in exposing a police officer for bribery, but said connecting the events is illogical. Here is the quote. This is the same person who was involved in exposing the police officer for bribery, but it is illogical to connect the exposure of the police officer with the appearance of this group of men. Since they arrived before this exposure, they appeared there on the night of May 20th to 21st, and the exposure took place on May 21st. That is, they came for fishing, not knowing about this event yet. On May 25, 2020, the head of the Zhytomyr Regional State Administration, Vitaly Bunechko, during an online briefing, called the attempts to link these two cases manipulative. In addition, he added that the murder of the 7 men had nothing to do with the fact of documenting the bribe. The fallen men's comrades also stated that they do not believe the version about some kind of conflict. Here's a quote. If any of the guys come for a showdown, they don't sleep in the same room, they don't eat there, they don't fish there, and they don't grill shashlik there. So what kind of conflict could there be if they just came to relax after their rotation? You have to admit this comment sounds very logical. One way or another, in the end, to reconstruct the full picture of the event, the police ordered about 200 examinations, and there were supposed to be about 100 court hearings, but at a certain point, the proceedings practically stopped taking place. At first, in September 2021, Zakharenko twice announced the change of his own lawyers. He accused the defenders of cooperating with the prosecution.
My lawyers for a year and a half. Well, they didn't defend me properly.
They convinced me to stay silent, not to say anything. That's a fact.
Even during these 1.5 years and after the investigation was over, they didn't let me review its results.
Even the prosecutor can confirm this. Then, the new lawyer started petitioning to have his client's detention replaced with house arrest, arguing that Zakharyenko's health was deteriorating. The court denied this, but hearings were postponed multiple times due to the defendant's health. His blood pressure would suddenly spike very high, and later the man was even hospitalized twice, so the hearings were postponed again, of course.
Because his blood pressure went up and he started having heart problems. An ambulance was called and Anatoly Petrovich was hospitalized. However, from now on, it will be up to the hospital to decide what treatment actions to take.
In January 2022, the suspect and his defense attorney requested the recusal of the panel of judges, expressing doubts about their impartiality. That request was again denied, but the hearing of the case was still postponed. When the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia began, on July 17, Zakharenko's detention was extended, and on the 27th, referring to the recommendations of the European Court of Human Rights and the deterioration of the man's health, which really did take place. The court changed his preventive measure from detention to round-the-clock house arrest. The suspect's relatives say he suffered 2 heart attacks in the pre-trial detention center after being moved there following the pawn shooting. In August 2022, Judge Inna Zinovich announced her recusal, so it took some time to appoint a new judge. However, after the recusal, due to a shortage of judges, it was not immediately possible to form a new panel in the new composition. She began working on the case only at the end of 2022, and at the same time, due to the defendant's health condition, the preventive measure was changed again. The round-the-clock house arrest then became only nighttime, and this lasted until December 2024. After all, on December 17, 2024, the defendant died. Death occurred in the hospital where he was brought for examination 2 days earlier. The suspect's son, Oleksiy, briefly commented on what happened as follows. He complained of pain in his abdomen and back. He was taken by ambulance, his aorta ruptured, and doctors noticed problems with it 6 months ago. It had dissected, and it needed to be replaced. But no one agreed to operate, saying that the surgery was complicated, would take 8 hours, and he simply would not come out of anesthesia. His son said Anatoly got painkillers after complaining of pain. When the medicine stopped helping, they went to the hospital, but it was already too late to save him. So, with the man's death, the criminal case was left without its main suspect. That's how it was.
I took out a small knife, opened it quietly, and saw him move. I pulled, and he shouted, "Katya, let me go," trying to break free. Then I started to cut more.
On July 12, 2021, around 6 in the evening, 14-year-old Daniil Romaniuk said goodbye to his mother and went to walk his friend to the bus stop. The boy promised to come home soon, but when he didn't show up after 3 hours, his mother started to worry. She kept calling her son's number over and over. When that didn't work, she started calling his friends. None of them knew where the boy had gone. After a few hours, Daniil's mother finally found out the answer to this question, but it turned out to be incredibly painful and also tragic. Mrs. Olha, the missing boy's mother, was restless all evening and night, which is understandable. She continued to actively search for her son, posting on social media and involving friends, who in turn split into groups and searched the area. By morning, when they couldn't find the teenager on their own, Mrs. Olha turned to the police for help. The woman informed the police about Mykola, a friend Daniil was with before he disappeared. The boys had been friends since kindergarten, often riding their bikes together, and that day was no exception. The police immediately questioned Mykola, and he said that he met with Daniil and spent time with him. Then their 14-year-old classmate Kateryna came to them. Daniil went for a walk with her, and Mykola just went home. An important detail in the boy's story was that before meeting with Kateryna, Daniil borrowed his friend's phone to make a call somewhere. After checking the outgoing calls, the police found a number that wasn't saved in his contacts and they dialed it. A woman answered the phone and said that it belonged to her granddaughter, who is currently living in Zhytomyr. It later turned out that this woman had another granddaughter, the same Kateryna who was last seen with Daniil. She was also found and questioned. The girl said that she really did see the boy the day before he disappeared. That day, around 7 in the evening, they were together in the forest. At some point, Daniil began making advances toward his classmate. The girl said that she was ready to have a sexual relationship with him, but only if they officially became a couple. But apparently that option didn't suit the guy. Against this background, the teenagers had a quarrel, and Daniil pushed Kateryna. She fell, then got up and simply ran away from her classmate. She just doesn't know what happened to him next. While police questioned witnesses, the missing boy's friends kept searching for him. They were just inspecting the basement of an abandoned, unfinished building when they noticed shoe prints in the sand. Some of them were smaller in size and seemed to belong to a girl, while others were larger and most likely belonged to a man. So, following these tracks, Daniil's friends soon saw blood. Realizing the seriousness of their discovery, the teenagers quickly called the police. Law enforcement officers arrived at the scene and carefully inspected the unfinished building, and soon they found a body. It was the body of the missing Daniil. It was covered with sand and surrounded by bricks. It immediately became clear that this was a violent death. The boy's hands were tied behind his back with wide tape, his throat was cut, and there were several deep wounds in the chest area caused by a sharp object. At that time, the object's nature was unknown. Daniil's hand position showed he struggled to break free. Everything suggested that before his death, the victim had been brutally tortured. It was hard to even imagine a person capable of such cruelty. But already on July 14th, law enforcement officers reported that they had detained a suspect. Or rather, a female suspect. It turned out to be Daniil's classmate, Kateryna. During a search of her residence, the police found blood-stained clothes, wide duct tape, and a box cutter. Investigators then suggested that it could be the murder weapon. Law enforcement officers were also interested in the testimony of Anastasia, the suspect's sister. That evening, Kateryna planned to meet Daniil. Around 7 p.m. after this meeting, Anastasia saw her sister near an unfinished building. Her clothes and body were dirty. When asked what happened, Kateryna replied that Daniil had pushed her, but she didn't want to share any details and simply went home to change her clothes. A few days after the girl's detention, the then head of the main department of the National Police in Zhytomyr region, Mr. Yuri Olinik, said that Kateryna confessed to what she had done during the interrogation. However, not right away. At first, she claimed that she spent the evening with the deceased in an unfinished building, and that he supposedly accidentally tripped, fell, and died. Kateryna was simply scared and decided that she or her parents would end up behind bars, so she hid the body, covering it with stones. But considering the injuries on the boy's body, it was obvious that this story was 100% made up. Under the weight of the evidence, the girl was forced to change her testimony and confess to the murder. But despite this, many people doubted, and still doubt, that a 14-year-old girl could have taken the life of her peer on her own. Daniil was a tall boy who often rode his bicycle and played on the school soccer team. He had a real athletic build, while Kateryna was much smaller than him. So rumors began to spread around the town about a possible accomplice, or maybe even accomplices, who helped the girl commit that crime. Olya, the mother of the deceased, did not dismiss this version either. In the comments of one of the local community groups, under a post about the crime, the woman wrote the following comment: "This girl, together with her accomplices, taped up his hands, mouth, and legs, and cut his throat. And then, over my dead son, they also mocked him, cut him with a knife, and beat him with stones. How can I as a mother tell you what's in my soul and heart?" In turn, Kateryna's mother stated that she absolutely does not believe in her daughter's guilt. The woman said that during one of the interrogations, she heard from Kateryna that after Daniil disappeared, his friend Mykola called her in the middle of the night with threats. He said that he had stabbed his friend and ordered Kateryna to take a shovel, go to the unfinished building, and help cover up the crime. If she refused, he threatened to pin everything on the girl. However, this version was not confirmed. The telephone operator provided a detailed record of calls from Mykola's number, and thanks to this, it was proven that he did not call Kateryna at night. Although the girl lied, got confused, and changed her testimony often, even law enforcement officers initially doubted her guilt or that she was solely responsible. As practice shows, confessions are not always truthful, and there was not much other evidence in the case, or it simply was not made public. But it is known for sure that during the investigative experiment, Kateryna pointed to the place where the victim's mobile phone and personal belongings were later found. In addition, she described in detail where and how she struck Daniil, and her testimony matched the nature of the injuries found on the boy's body. It was after that the police no longer had any doubts about this girl's guilt. However, the motive for the crime still remained a mystery, at least until the girl herself publicly revealed it. But to understand the reason for this crime, you need to learn a little more about the relationship between Daniil and Kateryna. There are several versions here. The teachers at the gymnasium where the teenagers studied claim that they hardly communicated with each other. Teachers described the boy as the life of the party, sociable, decent, and sincere. He was truly respected by his classmates and other students, did well in his studies, and was active in sports. Kateryna, on the other hand, was his complete opposite by nature. The girl had only one friend, was withdrawn, inconsistent, and not always honest, and she was indifferent to her studies. Well, that's just how it is. Again, according to the teachers, there was a normal relationship between her and Daniil, just like two classmates. No one showed aggression toward the other. They weren't enemies, but they definitely weren't close friends either. Meanwhile, Daniil's relatives claimed that Kateryna was bothering him. The boy liked another girl, and Kateryna was trying to get his attention by clinging to him and, let's say, crossing personal boundaries. Once she tore the sleeve off the boy's jacket, and another time she reached for his genitals. Again, this is according to the relatives, but at the same time, Kateryna's and Daniil's peers have a completely different version. According to their stories, there really was a romantic relationship between the girl and the boy. For some time, they even dated, but it was a no-strings-attached kind of relationship. Acquaintances testified they had a sexual relationship. Again, at least once, the couple even came to that same unfinished building to give in to their feelings. Since Daniil liked another girl as well, he tried his best to hide his relationship with Kateryna, and Kateryna apparently wanted to be like an official couple. She wasn't very pleased that basically she was just being used to satisfy physiological needs again. And apparently, this version is the closest to the truth because in the end, it was confirmed by Kateryna herself. According to her confession, that day around 6 in the evening, the guy contacted her himself and suggested they meet. He tried to ensure no one suspected any relationship between him and Kateryna. He told his friend he was going home, but actually went to meet the girl. They walked together to that same unfinished building. Daniil left his bicycle nearby. Then the teenagers went down to the basement where they planned to give in to their feelings again. But at some point, Kateryna felt anger and aggression toward Daniil. Then she remembered that she had tape, a utility knife, and spare blades with her. The girl carried all this to cut flowers since she was working on a herbarium. But that time, Kateryna decided to use all of it for a different purpose.
I suggested to him, let's try role-playing. He agreed, he sat down and I said, let me tie your hands. He said, alright. I tied his hands and asked, can I cover your face with a cap because I'm a little shy? I took out a small knife and quietly opened it. Then Daniil says, are you starting? And I say, yes, I'm starting. Before I sat him down, he handed me a condom so I could put it on him. I took the knife. At first it was like that. He didn't scream like, it was pretty quiet. And he said, Katya, I'm scared, blah blah blah. And then he said, Katya, leave me like this, I want to die. And he pretended like he was dead. And I thought, I'm not stupid, and started from the other side.
After the murder, the girls started bringing bricks to the body and stacking them near it to cover everything up. The condom that Kateryna mentioned during her confession was later found by law enforcement at the crime scene, and it also became evidence in the case. According to Kateryna, she killed the guy because in May he sexually assaulted her after she told him that she just wanted a normal relationship and wouldn't sleep with him just like that anymore.
And at some point I wanted to hurt him. I don't know, I just felt happy that he would die soon.
In October 2021, the case about the murder of Daniil Romaniuk was sent to court. More than a year later, in November 2022, the jury found Kateryna guilty of the intentional murder of the boy, committed with particular cruelty. The verdict is 13 years of imprisonment and more than 1 million hryvnias in moral compensation, which Kateryna's family must pay to the victims. The verdict states that the accused did not admit her guilt. From this, it can be concluded that the girl either withdrew her testimony or at least changed it. Either way, the court ruled that the prosecutors presented the jury with indisputable evidence of the crime, as well as the conclusions of several expert examinations that prove Kateryna's guilt 100%.
Initially, rescuers believed both had suffocated in the fire, but investigators later found multiple stab wounds, leading police to suspect the fire was set to cover up the murder.
36-year-old Maryna Sasyuk was walking with an acquaintance in Shadwarivsky Park. The man and woman, talking to each other, hardly paid any attention to the annoying young man who was making inappropriate comments and following them. But he, on the contrary, was closely watching the couple. You see, in his mind, clouded by drugs, a plan was gradually forming, one that was about to spiral out of control and claim more than one human life. The next day, on September 4th, 2021, Maryna's neighbors noticed smoke coming from her apartment. Here's a quote. They thought she had gone somewhere and left something cooking or something like that, so they started knocking. She wasn't there, so we went to the window and saw smoke. We immediately called the firefighters. The rescuers who arrived couldn't enter the apartment right away because the door just wouldn't open. They had to climb in through the balcony, and the room was filled with heavy smoke. Despite the smoke, the firefighters managed to spot the body of the teenage girl lying on the floor. They pulled her outside and tried to revive her, but it didn't work. The girl showed no signs of life. It would be quite logical to assume that she was poisoned by gas, but the deep cut on her neck made it clear something much more terrifying than a household accident had happened in this apartment. And there was more. In the next room, the firefighters found another body. It belonged to Maryna Sasyuk, the mother of the deceased girl. The woman had also died a violent death. This was indicated by numerous wounds and blood that was splattered all over the room.
So many police officers arrived. They say that 2 of those girls died there.
Basically, there was no actual fire in the room. The source of the fire was found quite quickly. Some items in a dresser were smoldering in one of the rooms. After the fire was dealt with, state emergency service employees detected a strong gas smell. That's when they saw that someone had turned on all the burners on the stove. They immediately turned them off to prevent an explosion and then called the police to the scene. At that point, it was already obvious that the apartment was the scene of a brutal double murder that someone had tried to disguise as a fire. The girl and the woman died instantly from stab wounds. Both died right at the scene. Law enforcement officers, after inspecting the apartment, noticed that many valuable items were missing, including money and expensive jewelry. A little later, it turned out that the car owned by Ms. Maryna was also missing from the parking lot. At the same time, experts had already determined the probable time of the crime. It happened between 9 and 10:30 in the morning, while the firefighters were called around 12 o'clock. But, as Maryna's neighbors said, before the fire started, they hardly heard or saw anything suspicious. Here's a quote. "We were at home. My husband had just come back from work, but there was nothing to hear. I personally didn't hear anything either. I smelled something burning and opened the balcony. I look and see that some things are being thrown down from the upper floor. Then I went out to the stairwell and saw a fire hose. They said there was a fire, an apartment was burning." Only one man remembered that that morning he was reading a book to his granddaughter, and at some point he heard a sharp child scream. He thought it was just someone playing. Besides, it wasn't clear which apartment the sound came from. Despite the fact that no eyewitnesses to the incident who could provide more details were found, law enforcement had one rather important lead: a street surveillance camera that recorded an unknown man getting into Maryna's car shortly before the neighbors noticed the smoke. The footage shows the unknown man, dressed in sweatpants and sneakers, quickly running to the car, getting into the driver's seat and driving away. Thanks to the Safe City system, the police were later able to track almost the entire route the suspect took that day. In the Zhytomyr region, a special operation called Interception was immediately launched, involving law enforcement officers from 3 neighboring regions as well. This was to prevent the man from escaping beyond Zhytomyr region or leaving the country. At dawn on September 5th, the suspect was apprehended in the territory of the Ruzin community, which is almost 100 kilometers from the scene of the crime. The man did not resist and almost immediately confessed to what he had done. So, the killer turned out to be a previously unconvicted 22-year-old resident of Zhytomyr named Denis Horkusha. At the investigative experiment that took place on the same day, in the presence of witnesses, he described in detail how he took the life of the young mother and her 13-year-old daughter. Thanks to this, the police were able to reconstruct not only the entire sequence of events leading up to the crime, but also the very moment of the murder itself. So, on the evening of September 3rd, Maryna went with her friends to a party at the Boho Club, where the girls were just relaxing, dancing, and drinking alcohol. From time to time they would go outside, and during one of these moments they met a man. His name isn't available in open sources, so I'll call him Serhii. Serhii was traveling from Lviv to Kyiv, passed through Zhytomyr, and decided to stay overnight. He was just walking near the club and met Maryna with her friends, giving all of them a compliment. One thing led to another. And now the new acquaintances are already drinking champagne together. The newly formed group talked for about an hour, and then the women suddenly remembered that they had left their things in the car. Serhii said he would wait while they picked up their things and came back to him to continue the evening. The friends left, and about 30 minutes later, only Maryna came back to Serhii. It was already well past midnight, but the man suggested to the woman that they take a walk through the city at night, and she agreed. Together, they went to the park and continued talking there. During this conversation, they actually got to know each other better, and at some point, a stranger in a hood approached them. He asked if he could join the group, then started saying inappropriate things. Maryna and Serhii just brushed off the weirdo and went on with their walk. During their walk, they kept running into him, that man, but he didn't approach them anymore, so eventually they just stopped paying attention to him. By that time it was already quite late, or rather, quite early, and Maryna told Serhii that her daughter was waiting for her at home and would wake up soon, so she really needed to go. The man offered to walk the woman home, and they went together. Serhii waited until Maryna entered her apartment, heard the familiar sound of the lock closing, and only then left the building. And it was then that he saw the same unpleasant man from the park again. He was standing in the yard, looking at the windows of the building where Maryna lived. It seemed strange, but Serhii was in a hurry because he had to leave for Kiev soon. He was convinced that Maryna was already at home, behind closed doors, that is, completely safe, so he dismissed the anxious thoughts from his mind and went to the hotel to pack his things. Meanwhile, the strange man, Denis Horkusha, continued to watch the house where Maryna and her daughter lived. He had followed the couple from the park at a distance, then hid and waited for Serhii to leave.
He had followed her from the cafe, planning a profitable crime, taking their property.
As Horkusha himself claims, he only wanted to take advantage of Maryna's helpless state as she had drunk too much that evening and rob her. However, this plan got out of control. Interestingly, Denis had rubber gloves and a knife with him, so it seems he had planned his crime in advance. The man had huge debts, he was a long-time gambler, and he had recently lost a lot, so he wanted to make some money this way to pay off some of his debts. But until that evening, Horkusha didn't know Maryna and assured the investigation that he chose her as a victim completely by chance. This is where the case shows some inconsistencies. The thing is, during the trial, Serhii testified that he heard the door close behind Maryna. But at the same time, Horkusha claims that he entered her apartment because the woman forgot to lock the door. Either way, he ended up inside the apartment and started looking around. The man says he was convinced that the woman lived alone. Here is a quote.
I just wanted to take the valuables and leave.
So you didn't plan to kill anyone?
No.
Denis, without hurrying, was going through Maryna's things and looking for valuables. He managed to steal jewelry worth about 32,000 hryvnias, but that wasn't enough for Denis. While rummaging through the apartment, he saw the sleeping and helpless Maryna and committed actions of a, let's say, sexual nature against her. At the moment when it all started, the woman was very drunk and asleep. She couldn't resist and didn't even know what was happening. At that point, still a robber but already a rapist, he realized that Maryna was not living alone. So, after committing the assault, he went to her daughter's room and put a knife to her throat. The girl woke up and the man started demanding that she tell him where the valuables were hidden. The frightened child pointed to the wardrobe drawer in the hallway. Then Denis left the knife near the girl and went in the direction she had indicated. There he found even more jewelry as well as car keys. While the man was rummaging through the things, Maryna's daughter grabbed the knife and, trying to protect herself and her mother, ran up to Denis and stabbed him several times in the back.
As far as I knew, there was only one drunk woman there, but it turned out there were two. The child stabbed me in the back.
They were superficial, and the man knocked the knife from the child's hands. After that, he attacked her, covered her mouth with his hand, and began inflicting multiple stab wounds on the girl. At the same time, Maryna woke up and, hearing the noise, ran into the hallway. But by that time, the attacker had already killed the girl and now attacked her mother. Both died from massive blood loss, as there were very, very many wounds on their bodies. After the murder, Denis decided to cover his tracks. He lit a candle and placed it next to some belongings in the far room, then turned on the gas in the kitchen and left the apartment.
He dumped out her clothes and set them on fire in the room where she was killed.
Around 11:30, he ran out of the building and got into Maryna's car. He drove it to the village of Vilnopilia, and there he also set the car on fire. Most of these details came from Denis during the investigative experiment. He revealed several facts only the killer would know. He showed how he struck the blows, how he committed sexual violence, how he struggled with the little girl, and pointed out the places from which he took the valuables. In addition, he clarified the circumstances that led to the fire and provided information about the location of Maryna's car. He also added that on that day he called his wife and told her about the crime he had committed. By the way, she also gave testimony. The woman explained that she had been planning to divorce her husband since the summer. The main reason was his gambling addiction, which had gotten the family into significant debt. For a long time, the woman didn't know about Dennis's problems, but in July 2021, everything came to light. During that same period, his father-in-law paid off all the man's debts, and he himself promised never to gamble again, but he continued. That's when the couple's relationship finally ended. On the night of September 3rd to 4th, when the murder happened, Horkusha didn't come home to sleep, but his wife wasn't surprised. They were about to break up, and he usually acted this way even before these events. Despite this, on September 4th at 8 in the morning, his wife still decided to call Dennis and ask where he was. He said he would be home soon, but after that, he just stopped answering the phone. His relatives even decided that he was missing and started searching for him, but soon Dennis himself got in touch and told his wife that he was driving alone in a car and didn't know where he was going. That conversation sounded like a farewell. He also added that there was blood on his body. At first, his wife thought that Dennis had torn his stitches as he had recently had surgery on a tendon. However, the man gave no details and ended the call. Then his wife went to the village thinking that Dennis was there. At that time, he called again and said that he was in the Ruzhinsky district. The woman rushed there, but she didn't find her husband. She called him many times, but he ignored all the calls. And a few hours later, the police came to the apartment where the Horkusha couple lived, searched the place, and showed Dennis's wife footage from surveillance cameras. In the crime scene yard, the woman recognized her husband as the stranger who was getting into Maryna's car. On the night of September 4th to 5th at 2 in the morning, Horkusha called his wife again, told her where he was, and confessed to killing 2 people, though he didn't go into details. He asked his wife, what should I do? And she told him that he had to turn himself in to the police. Then Dennis said that he saw a police car and that he was going to go straight to them. But let's say, the man was only turning himself in and confessing to everything at the beginning. Later on, during the case, after getting support from a lawyer, he suddenly changed his testimony. He insisted that he came to Maryna only to rob her. He admitted to this crime, and then said that when he entered Maryna's room during the theft, she attacked him and started grabbing him and pulling his pants down. Supposedly, they had sex by mutual consent. Actually, that's not quite right. Dennis claimed that the woman basically dragged him into bed, and after it was over, he started running away from her quickly, taking Maryna's car keys with him. The man insisted that when he left, both Maryna and her daughter were alive, and he had no idea what could have happened to them later. In turn, Horkusha's lawyers argued that the investigation was conducted with violations. They claimed that their client's confession was allegedly obtained by force, and Maryna wasn't that drunk that she couldn't resist. If she didn't resist, then she was fine with everything. In any case, all of this was refuted during the trial. The experts who examined the case materials assured that during the investigative experiment, Horkusha did not behave like someone who had been forced to confess. They managed to prove that he told everything voluntarily, and moreover, he shared details that only he could have known. The claim that Maryna could have resisted was also criticized. Thanks to blood tests, it was proven that she was physically unable to resist the rapist. In addition, it was proven that Horkusha committed the crime while under the influence of drugs, which of course only aggravated his guilt. At the same time, a psychiatric examination showed that he was fully aware of his actions and could control them, meaning he is sane. The verdict for Dennis Horkusha was delivered in April 2024. He was found guilty under 5 articles of the Criminal Code of Ukraine: rape, robbery, intentional destruction of property, illegal seizure of a vehicle, and finally, the intentional murder of 2 or more people for selfish motives. So in the end, the man received a life sentence with confiscation of all his property. In addition, Horkusha was ordered to pay the families of the victims 5.5 million hryvnias as compensation for their lives. Upon hearing the verdict, Dennis basically did not react in any way. He did not say any last words or apologies, but afterwards he began systematically filing appeals, none of which were granted. Eventually, the case reached the Court of Cassation. It is currently only known that the Supreme Court will consider it on April 16, 2026. Maryna and her daughter's relatives are struggling to cope with the loss. Natalia Kokan, mother and grandmother of the deceased, says she sees no remorse in the person who took them from her. Well, literally the most precious thing. Quote,
"He killed, and all this time he hasn't shown a single ounce of regret. Life imprisonment is too little for him.
I would like him to be executed so that he would suffer the way he made my children suffer."
Let's move on.
She sent him a photo where he was tied up with those kidnappers, and no one except the kidnappers had that photo.
On August 6, 2018, an anxious woman contacted the Zhytomyr police. She reported the disappearance of her 20-year-old daughter, Hanna Holubenko. The girl left home back on August 2, and since then, no one has seen her. At first, her relatives assumed that Hanna might have gone to Kyiv.
She left home and that's it. That's the end. The child disappeared and her phone doesn't answer.
When 4 days passed and the girl still hadn't made contact, it became clear that something, at the very least, bad had happened. Basically, these suspicions were confirmed when law enforcement started the investigation. Just 2 days after the mother's report, they found Hanna's body on the outskirts of the village of Bondartsi. The condition of the body left no doubt that the young girl had become the victim of a brutal crime. It took less than a day to identify the killer and detain him. It turned out to be a 31-year-old resident of Zhytomyr named Vitaly Zalevsky. You see, for a long time he made a living by producing and selling narcotic substances. He knew Hanna well. They were in a romantic relationship. Basically, there are no facts indicating that they were an official couple, but acquaintances note that there was intimacy between them more than once, at the very least. In addition, there were also rumors that the girl was involved in the same business as Mr. Zalewski. One way or another, the motive for her murder turned out to be not romantic conflicts, but work-related disputes. You see, it was a desire for revenge.
There was no robbery. She had a gold chain and her purse with her. Her expensive phone wasn't stolen. It seems like revenge. He just wanted to ruin someone.
The thing is, in June, shortly before Hanna's death, several unknown men broke into the Kyiv apartment owned by Vitaly. They simply kidnapped Zalewski, took him to Zhytomyr, and held him by force in some garage for 3 days. The men tortured Vitaly and demanded that he transfer his property to them, give them all his money, and most importantly, share his recipe for making drugs. Say my name. By some miracle, Vitaly managed to escape, went to the police, and filed a complaint against his tormentors, who were soon apprehended. Meanwhile, Vitaly returned to his normal life. But later, Hanna sent him photographs in which the man was depicted during his captivity. Only the kidnappers could have had those photos, so Zalewski concluded that it was Hanna who led the attackers to his apartment in Kyiv.
She sent him a photo where he was tied up by these kidnappers, and no one except the kidnappers had that photo. And because of this, he concluded that only she knew where he lived in Kyiv.
Well, to put it mildly, this made Vitaly very angry. On August 2nd, he arranged to meet with the girl, hoping to discuss the photos he had received with her. The day before, Zalewski borrowed his friend's car to drive 2 acquaintances to Novograd-Volynski. So, the man's plan was as follows. He, along with his friends and Hanna, would go to their destination, drop them off, and then he would talk business with the girl, so to speak. When the group got together and set off, Vitaly suddenly remembered that he urgently needed to buy some tape to fix the mirror in the car, so he got out of the car and bought everything he needed. Soon, Vitaly made another stop, supposedly at Hanna's request. She allegedly wanted to take some drugs. Everyone in the car supported this idea. While they were using the substances, they started talking about a photo that Mr. Zalewski had recently received. During the conversation, he had a serious argument with Hanna. According to Vitaly, the girl admitted that she had led the kidnappers to him, and what's more, she supposedly found the whole situation funny. In addition, she mocked the abuse that Vitaly suffered from his kidnappers and shared facts that only the criminals could have known. She specifically stated that Vitaly suffered sexual violence during his captivity, and now, in her opinion, he can no longer be considered the same real man. At that time, it seemed to Zalewski that the girl described all this with particular pleasure, which made Vitaly even angrier. At that moment, the couples they knew in the car decided to step out for a smoke and wait until the man and the girl resolved their relationship. In fact, Vitaly himself also asked them to do this. While standing outside, the men heard the sounds of an argument coming from inside the car for about 2 or 3 minutes. They knew that Vitaly had a weapon with him at that time. To be more precise, they were convinced that Hanna's life was not in danger, so they didn't react to any of the sounds. At the same time, the situation in the car reached a boiling point. At some moment, Vitaly lost control of himself. First, he started threatening Hanna with a pistol, and then he attacked and began to strangle her, wrapping around her neck the same tape he had bought some time ago. Hanna resisted with all her might, but the strength was unequal and she died quite quickly. Just a few minutes later, Vitaly got out of the car and told his friends that he had killed the girl. The men discarded their cigarette butts and peered into the car. They immediately noticed the duct tape on Hanna's neck, which was used to end her life. Vitaly ordered his friends to keep the crime completely secret, and they agreed. Moreover, they were the ones who helped the man get rid of the body. They drove to Bondartsi, where Vitaly removed Hanna's body from the car, placed it on a garbage pile, and covered it with slate. After that, he simply drove his acquaintances home and decided it was time to return the car to its owner. Let me remind you that he borrowed it from friends. The man who lent the car to Vitaly later testified in court. He said that he had known the killer since 2017 and that he regularly borrowed the car from him. There were no problems. When he gave his Renault to Zalievsky on August 2nd, the car was in perfect condition, but Vitalik returned it with a broken radiator and without the right side mirror. Besides, the car turned out to be extremely dirty. When asked what happened, Zalievsky simply explained that the car got stuck in the mud and had to be pulled out. Nothing criminal. Well, as a result, it got dirty and a little bit damaged. That answer fully satisfied the man who lent the car. By the way, he was acquainted not only with Vitaly but also with the deceased Hanna. He said that lately Vitaly and Hanna had started arguing often. And shortly before the tragedy, Vitaly came to him in a hysterical state and said he needed to deal with Hanna, shouted loudly, cursed, and waved his hands. When Vitaly returned the car to his friend on the day of the murder, he was extremely nervous and was wearing completely different clothes than a few hours earlier when he had taken the car. At the time, the man didn't pay attention to it, and really, who would have? On August 8th, when he learned Hanna's body was found, he grew worried as pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. He inspected his car once again and found a small drop of blood on the back seat. After that, he immediately went to the cops. After Vitaly was detained, he admitted his guilt and apologized to Hanna's family, saying that he actually didn't intend to kill the girl, but lost control of himself. And that's it. Despite this, the psychiatric examination concluded that he did not lose control. The man was not in a state that deprived him of the ability to realize and control his actions. Moreover, the investigators concluded that the accused planned the murder in advance. Law enforcement officers believed that Vitaly intended to kill Hanna from the very beginning. He deliberately went with her to a deserted place, took a weapon with him, and asked his friends to get out of the car before the attack. And in addition, the police believe that before the murder, Vitaly tried to force Hanna to drink some unknown substance. Perhaps he planned to poison her in order to make it, so to speak, easier to cover up the murder.
Here is a quote. He put a gun to her and tried to force her to drink a medicinal substance. She refused, and after that he strangled her. They struggled for a long time. She fought for her life.
So, according to the investigation, all this indicates that the man did not act suddenly or impulsively, but did everything consistently, purposefully, and with the intention of achieving a specific result, which was a murder driven by a desire for revenge. And besides, he tried to cover up the crime instead of confessing everything right away, which would have been logical if it had been an impulsive act and the man regretted it. Taking all this into account, on June 28, 2022, Vitaly Zalewski was sentenced. The court sentenced the man to 11 years in prison and ordered him to pay more than 1 million hryvnias in compensation to the family of the deceased. Well, that's how it is, and we move on.
Around 300 Baranivka residents gathered at Zhytomyr District Territorial Recruitment Center's 2nd Department for explanations on the death of 32-year-old Serhii Kovalchuk, whose family suspects he was beaten there.
On May 28, 32-year-old Serhii Kovalchuk was at the Territorial Recruitment Center for a military medical commission. On May 29th, the man was taken to the hospital. On June 2nd, he died, and on June 4th, Kovalchuk was buried. In order to determine what exactly happened, law enforcement agencies got involved in the case. The public was already learning about everything, mostly from news in the media. So, the following story will be based on data from open sources and a number of quotes from Ukrainian media outlets. The case of the death of Serhii Kovalchuk from the city of Baranivka, Zvyahilsky district, Zhytomyr region, became high profile and known throughout the country. This could have just been a story about visiting the Territorial Recruitment Center, passing the medical commission, and being declared fit or unfit. However, things turned out differently. A seemingly simple procedure ended in tragedy. Serhii Kovalchuk ended up in the hospital even before the inspection by the relevant authorities was completed. When the man was admitted, his condition was critical. At least, that's what was stated by Anatoly Bortnik, the head of the intensive care and resuscitation department at Zvyagil Hospital. The diagnosis at the medical facility was as follows: closed craniocerebral injury, linear fracture of the parietal bone, right-sided intracranial hematoma, focal brain contusion, diffuse brain contusion, fracture of the lower jaw, and pneumonia caused by aspiration of food or vomit. Here's a quote. The patient was immediately sent for surgery, then for 4 days he was on a ventilator in extremely critical condition, and he passed away. But why did what happened happen? The administration of the Territorial Recruitment and Social Support Center immediately rejected all accusations of involvement in the death. The investigative team at the scene classified the incident as surprise, self-inflicted injury. Surprise, of course, in big, heavy quotation marks, because just a minute ago I read you the diagnosis. Of course, I'm not a doctor, dear friends, but if any of you are doctors, tell me, does such a diagnosis look like something you could call self-inflicted injury? Write it in the comments. The military state that Kovalchuk had been drinking for days and had minor injuries before reaching the Territorial Recruitment Center. Some were already there before he arrived at the Territorial Recruitment Center. According to them, the report from the Zhytomyr Regional Territorial Recruitment Center to the Command of the Land Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine about the events that led to Kovalchuk's death states the following. The man was allegedly supposed to be sent home, but he himself supposedly requested to stay at the security company location. Because you see, he lives alone and also due to feeling unwell as a result of alcohol consumption. I'm telling you exactly as it was said. In addition, in response to inquiries from Radio Svoboda journalists to the Command of the Ground Forces, which oversees the territorial recruitment centers, we learned the following. A few hours after waking up, Kovalchuk allegedly called his relatives and informed them about, I quote, his intentions, as well as the fact that no illegal actions were taken against him. Here is the quote. Already in the morning of May 29th, the man had his first epileptic seizure, during which he fell on his back onto the tiled floor and hit his head. He was given medical assistance, an ambulance was called, and soon he had a second epileptic seizure. The paramedics provided qualified help and hospitalized the conscript. The ground forces repeat that, according to preliminary information, the conscript received his injuries when he fell during epileptic seizures and while first aid was being provided. Later, law enforcement officers launched an investigation into the death of the conscript. On June 5th, over 100 people protested at the Baranivka Territorial Recruitment and Social Support Center. Those present, mostly women, chanted shame for some time. Later, people broke through the gates of the military enlistment office and entered the building itself. The police tried to restrain the angry crowd, but honestly, it was all in vain. The thing is, the relatives and acquaintances of the family had a different opinion from the version given by the Territorial Recruitment and Social Support Center about what actually happened. You see, people believed that the employees of the Territorial Recruitment Center were the ones responsible for Serhii's death. Here's a quote, "My son is dead and that's all there is to say." The report says he had a cranial and skull fracture and was taken to the hospital on May 29. We didn't see him when we came to deliver the summons. Our son lived apart. At 5 a.m., Territorial Recruitment Center staff came to him, and he disappeared for a day. We reached Zvyagil at 11 a.m. My child was already in the intensive care unit. He had been there for 3.5 days. We contacted the police, and they opened an investigation. They said he wasn't beaten, that it was a seizure, an epileptic attack, because my son had epilepsy. Mykola Kovalchuk added that the police opened an investigation at the family's request. In addition, as the conducted examination showed, there was no alcohol in the deceased's blood, and the version about epilepsy was also not confirmed. Member of Parliament and Temporary Investigative Commission member Yulia Yatsyk of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine stated this. Here is her quote. The death certificate states that the cause of death was multiple craniocerebral injuries to the head with displacement of the skull bones, and this was the cause of death. And as for whether this deceased person ever had epilepsy or had such incidents before, we don't know anything about that. The relatives of the deceased also claim that he never had such a diagnosis, and there are not even any other signs that could indicate he had epilepsy. So we rule that out. In the end, just like a number of other cases involving deaths where representatives of the Territorial Recruitment Center are involved in one way or another, this also did not receive detailed further coverage in our media. The Ground Forces Command of Ukraine launched an internal investigation, and Verkhovna Rada Commission member Yulia Yatsyk said the commission would reportedly urge the Commander-in-Chief and Ground Forces Command to replace the leadership of the Zvyagil Territorial Recruitment and Social Support Center. To what extent the head failed to fulfill his official duties and was unable to organize the work of his subordinates within the framework of the law. That's just how it is. Why am I even mentioning this? Because firstly, this is a high-profile story from Zhytomyr region, and this episode is about that region, and secondly, in my opinion, we really need to talk about such cases. We can't taboo them or just casually label them as IPSO. Silencing or dishonest investigation of crimes that may, I emphasize this word, may be happening within the walls of the Territorial Recruitment Center, in my humble opinion, only makes things worse. It's important to understand that crimes themselves, any crimes committed anywhere, are simply a part of our lives, our nature, of being human if you will, and they've been with us practically throughout our entire existence. It's naive to think that simply taking a position will make someone inclined to crime or violence suddenly lose those tendencies. And ultimately, keeping things quiet only breeds distrust in the system, while fair investigation and transparency will only strengthen that trust. In general, society, especially ours, especially now, needs to see that there are consequences for abuse of official power. Or if anyone acts outside the law, they are guaranteed to be held accountable, regardless of their position, status, amount of money, and so on. Moreover, I myself have been to the Territorial Recruitment Center many times over the past few years, and of course have some personal impressions as well. With your permission, I'll make a brief lyrical digression. There's nothing criminal, but I think my story is interesting and may be useful to someone. I'll clarify for those unaware, since some comments blame people like me for Russia taking over Ukraine. I didn't buy my unfitness. I have no certificates, no connections, nothing. Again, for those unaware, I had thyroid cancer that spread to cervical lymph nodes, followed by total thyroid and lymph node removal, radiotherapy, and lifelong hormone replacement therapy. Every day. Without it, I'd last just a few months. Literally. In other words, it's a bit more than just a scratch or poor eyesight. I've never been brought in by a van or forced to come to the Territorial Recruitment Center. I always went by myself, without lawyers or any other manipulations. Basically, whatever happens, happens. I did everything according to the general procedure, by the law, as it's written. But it took me 2 years of my life to get my decision. I suspect many taxpayer resources were wasted on bureaucratic processes, which I find inefficient and frankly stupid. 2 years ago, I first went to the Military Medical Commission and spent a month visiting various doctors. Because if you don't know when they assign you for additional examinations, like if there are some questions about something, like in my case, the whole process takes much longer than when there are no questions about your health. Well, in short, I eventually received a conclusion stating I was unfit with removal from military registration under Article 13A, but now it just says unfit under Order 402. At that point, I thought that was it. But if you didn't know, like I didn't back then, when you get such a conclusion at the local military medical commission, they send it for approval to the regional military medical commission. There, they make decisions without you. They only look at the papers. They approve it or reach another conclusion, such as fit for service or fit with limitations. If it's not the first or second, they return the case for revision. Mine was handled by the regional military medical commission in Lviv. They didn't review my documents for 14 months after I passed the military medical commission, then sent my case back for another review by the same commission. They had no questions about the diagnosis itself. They didn't say whether I was fit or partially fit, like yes, everything is fine. It's just that the case needs to be put together differently. Someone made a mistake in your documents, so let's redo them. That's basically how the doctors at my military medical commission explained their reasoning. This is quite a common practice, and they can send the case back even just because someone put a comma in the wrong place. Basically, because of such a comma, the case is sent back for revision, which means the conscript has to go through everything from the very beginning. More on this later. By the way, the conclusion about passing the first military medical commission was added to the reserve only 7 months after actually passing it. Before that, there was no information there at all about passing anything at the Territorial Recruitment Center or the Military Medical Commission. Nothing at all, as if I had never been there. I went to the Territorial Recruitment Center and said, I passed it, can you add something? They told me to wait. So I waited 7 months just for them to update my reserve data. By the way, during the time I was waiting for a decision from the Regional Military Medical Commission in Lviv, they even put me on the wanted list for not passing the Military Medical Commission. So, I went to the Territorial Recruitment Center, and they told me it was because I hadn't passed the new Military Medical Commission, since a year had already passed since the previous one, and I hadn't gone through the new one. I said, yes, I came to you, I asked what to do, and you told me to wait, so if I need to go through something else, I have no problem with that, just tell me. The Territorial Recruitment Center said I couldn't go through the Military Medical Commission yet and had to wait for a decision from Lviv and the Regional Military Medical Commission. A little mistake, so you have to keep waiting. For now, just write a statement like blah blah, I went through the Military Medical Commission, and here is a new conclusion about unfitness. Since I am waiting for a decision from the Regional Military Medical Commission, I asked to remove the search. I wrote the statement as they dictated, and they really did remove the search. Later, after the case returned from Lviv for another military medical commission, they put me on the wanted list again, which is pretty funny. I wasn't hiding from anyone. I'm not hiding now, and I did exactly what they told me, nothing more. While revisiting the Military Medical Commission, I also handled the wanted list issue. I visited the Military Medical Commission in the morning and waited at the Territorial Recruitment Center in the afternoon, sometimes spending days there due to the crowds. We'll get back to this in a moment as well. It was later clarified that my case was sent back for another military medical commission because more hospital discharge papers were needed. They acted like it was my fault for not bringing them, but I don't even know which discharge papers they mean. I had a stack of documents and repeated everything they told me to do. I tried to just talk, first of all, to say that I wasn't against a second military medical commission or anything else that needed to be done. But the first time, I did everything they told me to do, everything they wanted from me, and it was this same person, the head of the military medical commission, who told me what to do. If something was missing, is that my fault? Why are you yelling? You're the one putting the case together and signing it, not me. Well, and secondly, I tried to ask what exactly I need to do right now so that I don't lose another year and a half. Which hospitals do I need and what should I bring? Those seem like reasonable questions. But that man didn't let me finish a single sentence. He literally started yelling like, do you see how many papers I have here? I told you you were supposed to bring this, and that's it. That's it? Goodbye. Go to the repeat military medical commission. No one here will help you. Well, anyway, I start going through the second military medical commission. At the same time, as I said before, I go to the Territorial Recruitment Center to sort out the issues with the search. At that time, I had a funny reserve status, unfit with exclusion and wanted at the same time. If I find the screenshot, I'll share it. Once again, I wasn't hiding. I went to the Territorial Recruitment Center myself to ask what to do next. This visit to the Territorial Recruitment Center was really fun. Then they began mass sending search notices to everyone, including me, who had them lifted by a written statement. As it turned out, this wasn't something new or some kind of violation, but rather, let's say, a revived old thing, as I called it, a penalty phoenix. Because there were many people this time, you didn't go to a Territorial Recruitment Center officer's office, which is usually a lawyer. Everyone gathered in the assembly hall, where TCC officers sat on stage and called people in one by one. Over 100 people waited in line with only 3-5 processed per hour, occasionally a bit faster. On stage, 2 TCC officers stand on opposite sides. You sit in line, watch the show, then the first officer gives you a slip stating you're fine. Next, you line up for the second officer, and he gives you the details, the receipts, where to pay, so you can go and pay. At the reserve, I didn't have the opportunity to pay because, let me remind you, it was some old fine backdated, and you could only pay it physically and in full amount. It took me 2.5 days. I arrived at the Territorial Recruitment Center at 9 a.m. and left at 5 p.m., mostly just sitting and waiting. If you're not present during roll call, you'll be removed from the list, so holding your spot in line is pointless if you're absent. From that line, I ended up paying a fine, though it wasn't clear why. TCK officers said the State Bureau of Investigation announced that those removed from the wanted list by filing a statement, as I did, can no longer do so and must now pay retroactively. The TCK officers apologized, saying they can't do anything and are just relaying what they've been told.
I spent 2 days there, ended up seeing a lawyer, just to get this crap where I have a 17,000 fine.
Also, you told me to write a statement that, due to unsuitability, with exclusion, like it's not relevant anymore, and we wrote it, you signed it. After that, they removed me from the wanted list. However, he said the State Bureau of Investigation and others claimed all of this is illegal. And now they have to issue fines to everyone retroactively, and everyone is paying fines, and so I was issued a fine. Of course, you can only pay it in some kind of offline form. Tomorrow, I'll go pay it. Then there are lines again to get to this lawyer again. Although, of course, I still didn't understand what exactly my violation was. They wrote it was for not passing the Military Medical Commission, because supposedly a year had passed since the first one, and I hadn't started the second one. Although I constantly went myself and asked what was going on, when there would be a decision from Lviv, if I needed anything else, and so on and so forth. They told me to wait. Well, here I am. I waited. In any case, I didn't want to be running around the city with a wanted status. Waiting for the court's decision, I chose to avoid court by paying the money and moved on to the second Military Medical Commission. I really believed that in the end I would just do everything. If I follow the algorithm, there won't be any shady deals, connections, nothing like that, and I'll get what I deserve. Which eventually happened, but it took a long time. The second Military Medical Commission took much longer than the first and was much more of a nightmare, not least because there were already a lot of people that summer. First, I'd say that nearly half the doctors at the Military Medical Commission seem to enjoy tormenting people. I can't describe it any other way. Not all doctors, but a lot of them. Like, you can sit for hours in front of their office. Some doctors spend work hours doing personal things or just having tea with colleagues, that's it. No one cares what other things you have to do outside of this whole process. Come wait, maybe you'll get something done today, maybe you won't, maybe you'll spend a day on it, or maybe a month. Well, it depends. If you start paying attention to it, like there are dozens of people waiting here and you seem to be doing nothing, in the end you just end up waiting even longer. It's been tested, even with shouting. What I remember most is waiting 3 days in line for the ophthalmologist, only for her to say, "Oh, you have perfect vision." I said, "Yeah, I had laser surgery on my eyes." She said, "Oh, then you need to bring me the discharge papers from the operation." I said it was a long time ago. There are no discharge papers. Just state that I'm fine, fit, and have perfect vision. Since the first Military Medical Commission handled it that way for me, the woman said, "No, you're fit, and it won't affect anything. The conclusion doesn't matter, but I have to note this here." I said, "Well, write that I had laser surgery, that now I have perfect vision." She said, No, that's not going to work. We need precise numbers. Your vision before and after laser correction, what you took or didn't take, etc. She refused to accept it without that and asked me to leave. Goodbye. So I started hustling to get those records. The surgery took place at a private clinic a few years ago. So I can't just go there, pick something up, and come back to the Military Medical Commission. Thank God the doctor sent me a copy of that report, so I go back to the Military Medical Commission to see the ophthalmologist again. Another line. But this time, thank God, I only had to wait a day and a half. The ophthalmologist sees me and says, "No, this isn't the kind of report I need, and it has to have an official stamp, not just a printed copy like the one you brought me." She wouldn't engage in any kind of conversation and just asked me to leave again and only come back with that document. Here I go again. My ophthalmologist who did the surgery is already texting me angrily, asking what nonsense this is and who she thinks she is. But finally, I get the document that the specialist needed, and after a week, I finally managed to see just one ophthalmologist. Let me remind you that none of this impacts the case. I know she could have made things easier for me. At the other two branches, one commission came before and one after. We'll cover that too. Another ophthalmologist didn't question me and just said, "Everything's fine, go ahead." So, what's next? After seeing all the standard doctors, the therapist assigns additional exams. You then take the paper to the commission head for a stamp, which you need before proceeding with these exams. On the commission head's door, it says you can get the stamp without waiting in line. If I find the photo, I'll post it again. I waited about 4 hours to get that stamp. He was letting anyone in except me. When I finally just asked if he would see me, he said yes. His assistant saw and heard it. When only I was left in the office, he came out and said, "That's it, nothing will happen today. Come back tomorrow." Let me remind you, all he had to do was put a stamp on one piece of paper so I could go on to complete all the other checkups. I said, "You said you'd see me today," he replied. "Who told you that?" Well, he's really a jerk, this doctor, an unpleasant person. I said, "You said so," and thankfully his own assistant told him. "Yes, you did say that to him. I heard it. Thank you, ma'am, for that, for hearing it." Anyway, he put in those fillings. I went for a follow-up exam. Remember, I was supposed to get all this out of turn. He has that sign on his office door. Moving on, one follow-up exam is inpatient psychiatric care. My medical history shows I once took antidepressants, which was interesting, though not the medication itself. The examination, like the laser procedure, doesn't impact the fit or unfit decision and isn't related to my main diagnosis. It just adds extra running around and paperwork, but without it, no one will sign anything for you. I told them to just write "everything's fine. It was just depression," and put "fit." They say no, insisting that's the only way things are done due to procedure. I went to that hospital, and it's the same bureaucratic mess, just viewed differently. So, a quick look at the restroom in the regional psychiatric hospital. Yes. Like this. You can turn blue, it's convenient. I pooped here. 3 days in lines just to get where you need to go. You spend a few days in the hospital, speak to the doctor once, she signs a report, and then you return to the military medical commission. After about a week, I go back to the commission. Then you start seeing oncologists and endocrinologists based on my profile. This also happened in public hospitals, but they didn't give me any inpatient treatment referrals. We'll revisit this point later. So, eventually, 4 weeks after starting the second military medical commission, I received a new conclusion, temporarily unfit for 1 month, and then right after a month, they scheduled me for a new third military medical commission. Because the commission had said they still didn't do the additional exam I needed during the second military medical commission, inpatient care at the regional endocrinology department. He and the therapist assign referrals for exams. He could have just said he isn't writing the conclusion yet. Review this too and return. Like other extra exams, such as at the psychiatric hospital, they admitted me as an inpatient even though it had nothing to do with my profile or illness. Well, I mean, how am I supposed to know exactly what they're missing there? After all, they also sent me to endocrinologists and so on at state hospitals, but not to the right place. In short, in other words, the head of the commission handled my case again, signed it, and said, "Okay, this month you get a 1-month deferment. During this time, get admitted to another inpatient facility or endocrinology, and return in a month for the third military medical commission, at which, attention, everything starts from the very beginning." Once again, so, in August of this year, I was staying in the regional inpatient endocrinology department. Right away, as they say, I went straight from the ship to the 3rd Military Medical Commission, which took up my time. From August 29 to October 3, it was basically the same there. Despite going through so much just a month earlier, this still happened. It's a new military medical commission, and you have exactly the same examinations, lines, and so on. The same stuff. They say they can't use last month's conclusions since this is a new case, and now the 3rd Military Medical Commission. Some might take the test, some copied it, but for most doctors you still have to go through everything from the beginning again. Well, anyway, in the end I get the conclusion unfit with exclusion again, or more precisely, 13A basically, the article from the law. They send me to Lviv again. 2 months after my last military medical commission and 2 years after the first, they finally signed everything and officially removed me from the military register. Of course, I'm glad that I finally got what I deserve according to the law, without any tricks, deals, money, or any of that. But in my opinion, all of this could have taken just a couple of weeks, and that's with plenty of time to spare, not 2 years. How many resources are they using? It's unclear what the purpose is. Just this summer, I had 3 x-rays and 2 ultrasounds done, probably expecting my organ to grow back or something. I don't know, it's a bit of an overkill. It seems like they don't really know what they're doing, though I've also seen good doctors and representatives at the Territorial Recruitment Center. Hello. Overall, the system feels like it was made by early ChatGPT or Siri versions. That's just my impression. I haven't experienced any aggression or unlawful actions from the Territorial Recruitment Center. I didn't experience anything like that myself. Everything was dry, but there was no humiliation or anything like that. From my experience, I'd focus more on how doctors at the Military Medical Commission work. Honestly, just be human. Come on, like I said, nothing illegal, but maybe someone will find it interesting or useful. I'd be glad if so. And regarding the previously mentioned case from Zhytomyr region, to sum up, I'll add this. All that's needed is fair investigations and punishment in any case, whether it's a military enlistment officer, a plumber, or the head of the president's office. That is, the law should apply to all citizens of Ukraine regardless of their status, position, amount of money, or authority. We either have the law or we don't. That's basically it, dear friends. Thank you for watching. Take care of yourselves, don't forget to stay human whenever possible, and God willing, we'll see each other again.